So, welcome everyone to today's CSL in session, Compassion Fatigue and Libraries. My name is Christine Krieger, and I am the Professional Development Consultant for the Colorado State Library. Before we get started today, I want to briefly introduce you to CSL in session in case you haven't had the opportunity to attend before. You may be used to attending webinars where people sort of talk at you for an hour, and our presenters are going to share some really great information with you today. But we kind of like to shake things up here. And there will be ample opportunity as we go through for you guys to add your questions, your ideas, your thoughts. You can always ask questions in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on chat. We have a poll for you and a couple other fun activities where you can share your information as well. If you need to get a hold of me for any reason, in the upper left-hand corner, it's sort of confusing because there are two people called Colorado State who are logged in today. Colorado State 2 is my backup because we've had some power issues today and I don't want to disappear and kick everybody off. If you need to get a hold of me for any reason, you can send me a private chat. We do also have closed captions available during the session. If you go up to sort of the top black bar, you can see where the arrow is pointing. You can click on the CC button and turn the captions on or off. You can move them around the screen, and you also can make them larger or smaller based upon your individual needs. So, without further ado, I am going to introduce our presenters today. We have Sydney Klink, who is the head of programming for Mesa County Libraries, and Rosemary Frazier is an adult programming librarian at Mesa County. And I'm going to pull up their slides and then turn it over to them.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for that awesome introduction, Christine. We really appreciate your time and for putting this on for all of us today. And thank you everyone also who's here today to listen to what Sydney and I have to say. So my name is Rosemary Frazier. My pronouns are she, her. If we want to move forward in the slides. And I've been with Mesa County Libraries. We are in Colorado, kind of just like a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Utah border on the western slope. And I've been here for about 5 years. And in those 5 years, I've worked with youth. I've been in youth services, branch services, reference help for adults, and now programming for adults. And it's interesting, a little bit of my history on compassion fatigue. I come from a background of retail. And I also love that I get to do this presentation with Sydney because she's the one who hired me for libraries in 2019. And she, when I first started and was doing training, mentioned compassion fatigue. And that was the very first time I'd ever heard that term ever. And it really piqued my interest. And moving on from there through personal experience, as well as, as I furthered my library career, I was also getting my master's in library and information science from the University of Denver. And with interest and grad school comes research. And so I decided to delve into the topic a little bit more. And then also fast forward to about 2021, Sydney and I were able to attend a really unique 9-week, super intensive training through a local organization called the Counseling Education Center. And in those 9 weeks, the topic was compassion fatigue. And within that, my interest in this topic grew.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sydney Klink. I'm the head of programming at Mesa County Libraries. And I've been working in libraries in some kind of capacity for almost 23 years. I've been here at Mesa County for the last 5 years. And as we started preparing this presentation, it was kind of funny to me to hear Rosemary mention that I was the one who introduced her to compassion fatigue, or the concept of compassion fatigue, because there was definitely a time when I would have said that compassion fatigue does not exist in libraries. So I first became aware of compassion fatigue as it pertains to caregiver burnout. So I have a son who's 15 now, and 7 years ago he was diagnosed with a chronic illness. And the concept of compassion fatigue was introduced to me by his medical team. And so I fell into that trap that we'll talk about in a little bit of comparing trauma. So trauma or compassion fatigue, in my mind, didn't really happen in libraries. Because I was looking at it from a medical standpoint where things really are life and death. And so I have since then, through the workshop that Rosemary just mentioned, came to realize that we shouldn't compare trauma and also that we are experiencing compassion fatigue in libraries. And I'm just really excited to share more on that topic with you today.
So if we move forward into our agenda, we wanted to take this presentation and kind of deliberate into 3 different chunks. And so the first thing we'll be going over is what exactly is compassion fatigue, especially in how it relates to work in libraries specifically. The second thing we'll be going over is the science behind it. So what are some theories that have come around, and actually what is trauma doing to our bodies to understand ourselves and what we're going through in those moments? And then how do we take all of this information and how do we really help ourselves in ways that are actually meaningful and effective? So if we move forward, let's define compassion fatigue. So it's the profound emotional and physical exhaustion that helping professionals and caregivers can develop over the course of their career as helpers. And so part of my research in grad school, I was doing this about 2019, 2020, was that sure, compassion fatigue is in nursing, social work, teaching, animal shelters, other caregiving professions. Yes, I found lots of literature on that. But when I was doing that research, I found hardly anything on it specifically related to libraries. And that made me kind of sad. We as a profession, again, it's not about comparing. My profession is harder than yours, but how do we, as our profession, as library workers, actually then bring it to our forefront? We think about it, and how do we start to address it? And so other terms that we think about when we're considering compassion fatigue is secondary traumatic stress disorder, empathetic strain, just secondary trauma. Other terms that are being thrown around right now are burnout, of course, trauma-informed care. And so no matter what terms we use, the heart of what we're talking about here is trauma. Trauma is at the heart of compassion fatigue. And a good resource we do have a list of resources at the end of this slideshow for you to reference later, but a wonderful book called Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky. She states that trauma stewardship encompasses why we do the work we do, how it affects us, and how we make sense of it to learn from our experiences, therefore to make our work sustainable. And that's really, really what we want here is how do we make the work that we're doing sustainable? So whatever way we choose to define, whatever words we're using to think about compassion fatigue, let's just remember that, again, this is how to keep doing what we're doing. So not quite. So another thing I want to talk about is what compassion fatigue is not. It's not a diagnosis. There's nothing wrong with you. If you're feeling any of these symptoms, again, there's nothing wrong with you. This is just a biological reaction to being around suffering in its various forms for various amounts of time. It's not a static state of being. It varies depending on what symptoms may be hitting you at that moment. So it varies from person to person, day to day. So now moving forward to trauma. Again, trauma is at the heart of compassion fatigue. So let's also define trauma and how we're relating it in this presentation. So it results from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. And we do have, as Christine has mentioned multiple times, there is a download for you. There's a variety of sheets in that download. And so the first one I want to address here is there is a list of symptoms that if maybe you're new to trauma, maybe you're not sure, but there's a list of symptoms this is what can happen if you've experienced trauma in its various forms. So just for your reference for later if you want it. But essentially, again, the root of compassion fatigue is trauma. So I also really love this definition specifically because incident is not defined. Let's not put trauma in a box that society gives us. We in our experiences deserve more than that. So other things to consider when defining trauma for yourself is it's subjective in how we deal with it, and that could be determined by our age, developmental level, past experiences, your belief systems, support systems, or your level of resilience. So how you are affected by trauma also varies. And so thinking about different types of trauma, there's primary trauma, trauma that happens directly to you. Secondary, maybe you witness a traumatic event. Vicarious trauma is a really big one in libraries, or even today throughout news cycles. It's a cumulative exposure to traumatic stories and images. Even library stories can be fairly traumatic. And then another thing I don't want to forget about is burnout. And so what are the similarities behind all of these? Yes, there are differences, and our brain can think about the words and the definitions, but ultimately our body responds to trauma in the same way. So whether it's intense vicarious trauma, primary trauma, our bodies ultimately will still have symptoms, no matter what we've experienced. This is also a good time to mention that Sydney and I are librarians. We are not psychologists, so we are not here to sit up here and tell you what you are or not experiencing, and we're not here to diagnose anyone. We just want to apply these definitions and to really consider what we might be going through as a profession. And then also we are applying it to the way we see it in the workplace. But again, as Sydney mentioned, this can apply to home and various situations as well. And also trauma is complex and common. And so we're not here to compare or judge each other's traumas. So let's just take a moment to absorb this slide, that your trauma is valid, period. And so another thing when we think about vicarious trauma is if we move into low impact debriefing. Again, vicarious trauma is the culmination of sharing traumatic experiences. And so we bring this up because I know in my personal work experiences, there's been multiple points where maybe I go into a back room after a hard experience with a patron and I share a story, or somebody shares a story with me. And so consider how we're sharing these stories with each other. In the training that Sydney and I went to, there was a concept of sliming. And so if you think of trauma as slime and you've been slimed and then you go and share that story with somebody else, you're sliming somebody else. And it's just that really intensive visualization of what we're doing if we're not careful with how we share. But also we do need to share. We need to be in this space together and we need to support each other. So as we share, maybe think about some self-awareness, be aware of your surroundings. Are you in an appropriate company? And are you in an appropriate environment to share your story? Consider consent. Maybe your colleague or somebody that you normally share with isn't in a good headspace at that moment. So make sure that you ask for permission to share that story. Fair warning is after consent, also give them some trigger warnings. Maybe you know that this colleague is really sensitive to particular issues. Maybe let them know, hey, this is actually about this hard topic. Are you okay hearing that right now? And then limited disclosure, depending on the scenario of which you're sharing, maybe you don't have to share all the gory details. I know that I, in my reference help, have had some very, very hard interactions with patrons actually in crisis in that moment. And that was a moment where I definitely shared some of the gory details and I saw how it was affecting people when I shared that story. And it's definitely something that's impacted me when I think about how I share some of my experiences with my colleagues. And of course, we can't talk about trauma in libraries and burnout without talking about vocational awe. And so I don't know how many of you are aware, I know this has been out in library land for a while, but in 2018, Fabazi Ettar, if I mispronounce the name, I apologize, created or published an article, Vocational Awe and Librarianship, the Lies We Tell Ourselves. And essentially, this article discusses what ideas, values, and assumptions we, as well as our others, have about librarianship. There can be a notion that libraries are good, sacred, that we're all altruistic, and we are the last defense of democracy. And yes, while this may be true, libraries are not beyond critique. And this belief can manifest in some positive, but in also some negative ways. And if we're not careful, when we have this belief that we have so much work to do and we have so much good to do, and again, we are altruistic and we are self-sacrificing, that could lead to scope creep in our jobs where we just keep getting too much to do and we keep adding and adding and adding to the point where there's burnout. And again, the fact that maybe some of us think that we are essential to democracy, and again, maybe we are, but the library is only the building, and it is the workers that create the library work that we do. And we need to take care of ourselves to keep this work sustainable. And so let's not, as we think about vocational awe and the love that we have and that society has for our profession, let's not forget about taking care of ourselves. And so thinking about trauma in libraries specifically, I had mentioned that when I was doing research in grad school in 2019, 2020, I would not recommend grad school during a pandemic. Not at all. It definitely made that work really interesting. So while not a whole lot came out of my research, I did notice that there was a lack of literature. And I'm glad to see that I was not the only one who was thinking this. And so therefore, in 2022, the Urban Library Trauma Study kind of furthered this discussion, and I love the work that they did here. And so this is what they found in that study. So they did part of their research is they did a literature review. They also found it lacking. They conducted surveys of about 435. They had 578 surveys. 435 of those were actually usable. And then they also facilitated a series of focus groups, and that included virtual as well as some in-person groups to collect their data. And then this next slide shows some of the data that they found. That 68.5% of library staff have experienced a violent or excessive behavior from patrons. That 85% have experienced trauma in the workplace and have shared it with others. And that 83% stated that they received support from another member of staff. And they also came up with this infographic, the library trauma cycle. And so there's an outside stressor. Then there's the professional community response, then internalization. And again, wherever that outside stressor may be, whether it's a patron or maybe there's a policy that's not in place that could help staff move through some of what they're experiencing, but also the professional community response is variable. No response is a response. And so whatever that response may be creates that internalization and how we move forward with this heavy load that we're carrying. And so we're going to take a moment to breathe and pause here. And we are going to do a poll now. So in what ways do we as library workers maybe experience compassion fatigue?
And so the poll that I just pulled up, you can see as people are taking it, it is a select many instead of just a select one. So mark all that apply. I love watching the survey do its thing. And also, if you select other, feel free to add in the chat. You don't have to, but feel free to add in the chat what that other might be also.
Yeah, this is great. And again, this is diverse, and maybe we experience it, yeah, just experiencing all of these in different ways is really impactful. Or even if you're a manager and your job is to support your staff, that can be really hard.
And Erin had added trying to parent other people's kids when they won't do it and then getting grief for it. Yeah. So, there's, kids in the library who maybe aren't being watched as closely as they could and that kind of thing. So, yeah, that also can add to it as well.
Yeah.
See a couple other chats coming in, maybe not.
Thank you all for sharing.
I'm going to wait just a couple more seconds. It looks like there is another chat coming in before we move away from this window. But is anybody surprised by what you're seeing or kind of the numbers that you're seeing also? You guys are living it, so probably not. Yeah. Probably not surprised. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move back to the slides, but if you are adding comments, please feel free to continue that. Looks like Marie saying that not surprised. But do feel free if you have additional comments to add it. Yeah, patrons disorderly conduct and clearly affected by substance. And once again, I think we also know that a lot of people experiencing substance abuse, once again, I'm not a social worker or a doctor, but they themselves are using that a lot of times to deal with trauma that they have experienced. So thank you for adding that.
Yeah.
And Sarah, a little surprised that everyone didn't check everything, right?
That's a really good point, Sarah.
Right. Yeah. All right, so now we're going to move into that science part that we had talked about a little bit. So I used the image of a stoplight to kind of break it down before we get into the nitty gritty. So this is an introduction to the polyvagal model if you haven't heard of it before. It is a scientific theory introduced by Stephen Porges in 1994, and it's named after the vagus nerve located in our neck, the nerve that controls our autonomic nervous system. And so when you think about the autonomic nervous system, it relates to the parasympathetic, which is the ventral vagal that supports social engagement. So when we're in the green, we're safe, we're happy. That is where we can be our most social, creative, awesome selves. And then we go into the parasympathetic, para meaning, the sympathetic nervous system, para meaning alongside with. So that's the good one. Sympathetic is maybe the one where we're not necessarily feeling our best selves. And so that's when we go into the yellow. And that's the dorsal vagal, which controls our fight or flight responses. And this model goes into more detail about what's going on with our bodies when we feel safe or when we feel as though we are in danger. And so if we break it down into those colors, green, again, is the safe zone. You're okay, you're thriving, and we can be our best selves. Yellow is where the anxiety lives. That's where like somebody bumps you in the road or you hear the bush rustle behind you and you wonder if there's a lion chasing you. Your body goes into the fight or flight. And when you go into the red, that's when the time for fight or flight has passed. You are in danger, there is threat, and your body, your nervous system shuts down to protect yourself. And so that's where disassociation lives. That's where our bodies, again, they stop working, they disassociate. And so our surroundings have evolved, right? There's no saber-toothed tiger chasing us. So in modern society, what makes us feel like we're in danger? What gives us anxiety? And so maybe it's that one work email from the colleague that you absolutely hate and you read it and your body gets hot and so if you think about it in that context, what is your body trying to tell you? And so now we're going to move into the complex. This is what the actual polyvagal chart looks like. And it's got a lot of information on it. And so that's why I wanted to break it down first before showing you this. And again, this chart is also in the PDF. So you can reference that as well. And then there is also another PDF in there that lists compassion fatigue symptoms. So you may have experienced trauma, compassion fatigue symptoms, and then the third, there is this polyvagal chart if you want to look at it more closely. But I really want to point out the black line here showing us the bell curve of how it's supposed to be. Because again, this is our bodies doing what they're supposed to do. We need to be able to protect ourselves. Our bodies understand that. And so if you're in the green, something happens, you get yourself out of danger and you're able to come back down. But then what happens if you don't heal from a past trauma? Or what happens if you work in an environment where you are in fight or flight almost every single day? I also want to take time to point out the emotions that are in here. Again, society likes to maybe tell us what we can and cannot do, what's maybe appropriate for our emotions or not. And society aside, our emotions are tools just telling us what our body needs. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry. It's your body trying to tell you what you need. This is just a biological response. And so maybe you're angry at work all the time. Maybe what is your body trying to tell you there? You don't remember why you're feeling anxious in certain situations. Maybe there's some disassociation involved there and your body remembers something that you might not. And so again, if we listen to our bodies and we're thinking about what we need, what do you need to get back to the green? And so each trauma and symptom is unique. We all experience this model in a different way. And again, do you have what you need to get back into the green? And do you have those resources available? And I was really sad to see that a lot of us don't feel like we do. And a lot of times in library land, nobody died. Nobody's going to die. It's sometimes it's, yes, we are not necessarily in a caregiving role. We're not nurses, we're not doctors. But again, if you do have that patron that's on the outside that is in crisis, that really affects us. You know, the work that we do is impactful. And so really think about just what this chart is trying to tell us. And so if we think about our autonomic nervous system and how it affects our bodies, moving on to the next slide is a really good visual as well, where it's connected throughout our bodies. And so if we think about the sympathetic, the stress, you know, our gut is our second brain, right? And so if you're experiencing stress every single day, what does that do to our health? What are our bodies trying to tell us? And one thing that I definitely took away from that 9-week training that Sydney and I did was that, again, the calm side, right? The parasympathetic, our brains and our bodies are connected, but are they all the time? Like, is it always easy for our brain to understand what our bodies are telling us or vice versa? And so I used to get so mad at basic like self-care webinars where they're like, just breathe. It's fine. Just breathe. And I would be like, stop telling me what to do. Like, are you really listening to me? And then in this 9-week training, you know, there was a really in-depth moment of, if you do breathe, if you do these things that are good for your body, triggers are negative, right? But they are also positive. And so if we breathe a certain way, it actually triggers our body to slow down so that way our brains and our bodies can therefore get out of the red, get out of the yellow, and get back into the green so that we can be, again, our best selves. And so I'm not trying to tell you what to do. There's lots of different ways that we can take this information, learn about our bodies, and give ourselves what we need. And again, that was a 9-week training session. And the original version of this training that Sydney and I had put together was actually 2 hours. So you're getting the nitty gritty 1 hour quick version. But essentially, now that we have the science and we've established, yes, we experience trauma in libraries, we are here for each other, let's acknowledge it. Sydney is going to take over from here and talk about, so how do we take care of ourselves?
Okay, yes, let's talk a little bit about self-care. You can use your um, like hand raise icon to tell me how many of you are at the point where if you hear the word self-care, you just kind of cringe. Like those words are somewhat triggering to you, maybe in a negative way. And it's that hand is kind of on the like middle left of your screen. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of us are definitely in that place. And I can tell you that that's at the point that's where I was when I took this resiliency class that we've spoken about a few times. I considered myself to be a really resilient person. I had everything under control until I didn't. And then I went into that and I was at a point where I didn't want to be told to take a walk, take a breath, take time for myself, take vacation. And a lot of this had to do with that word take. And so, what I came to learn, and something that really stuck out to me about that class that we took, is that I have some very, or had some very limiting beliefs about what self care is. So, we're going to talk just a few minutes about limiting beliefs. And a limiting belief is defined as a thought or a state of mind that you think is an absolute truth and it stops you from doing certain things. So I like to think of this kind of as our operating system, right? Um, in that it's automatic. We don't really have to think about these limiting beliefs. They are just there. We may or may not know the origin of them, where they come from. But you can have limiting beliefs about yourself, about the world, about others, about work, about our profession. But of course, in the context of today's training, we're going to talk about limiting beliefs as they pertain to self care. And it's really important for us to kind of get at the heart of our limiting beliefs, especially about self care, because we want to be able to make intentional choices. And sometimes those limiting beliefs will kind of override. And they're natural. So they just kind of take over. And so when we are serving or like subject to our limiting beliefs, we're not being as intentional as we could. So we're going to do an exercise here. And in just a minute, I'm going to say a phrase. I'm also going to put it up on the screen and we're going to think about it. We're going to turn our thoughts inward and consider that phrase as I say it out loud and put it up on your screen. Okay, here we go. Your needs come first. Let me say it again. Your needs come first. So as you consider this phrase, pay attention to any thoughts, emotions, images, memories. What's your body doing when you think that to yourself? Your needs come first. And then Christina's put up a chat window, made it bigger on our screen so we can kind of focus on that. Is there anyone who wants to kind of share out in that chat what came up for you? Yeah, no, they don't. Yeah, I agree, Christine. That is what comes up for me a lot too. That's selfish. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's why I have such a hard time with that word take. I agree, Emma, and I think Angela also said selfish. Yeah.
And Ginger was saying, kind of over in the regular chat, that it's the opposite
yeah.
of what we've always been taught or believed.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Or Lori says it must be a joke. Yeah.
And Allison also, first after everything else that is going on.
Right.
Yeah, hard to take the time to consider the self, the idea of thinking about self. And I think Marie makes a good point that women always seem to believe that we have to take care of others first.
Isn't that right? Like, it's so gendered. Like, we had long conversations in that class about how gendered just the thought of self-care is. And that it is hard for women because that is what society tells us, is that we're the caregivers first. Yeah.
And librarianship, I think, also attracts people who are very service oriented, who are caretakers, whether you are male or female. And so I think that's where a lot of it also comes. It's sort of like, and there's also then that kind of like, we're also a customer service industry, and sort of the customer's always right. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. For sure.
And Kevin says it feels like there should be an elliptical phrase added there, like your needs come first before the answer to those, and the kind of list comes here. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Looks like we have a couple more coming in.
And yeah, every time we're on a plane, we're told we're supposed to put oxygen on ourselves first. And I am not a parent myself, but I could see like how that could be a really difficult thing in the moment if you have kids or you have other people that are depending on you.
Yeah, I remember in that class when this first came up, like I actually started crying, and it has to do with so my son has this chronic illness. If I don't put his needs first, like the result actually could be death. And so for me, I think that's why this hit so hard, and thinking all of those thoughts for me, like that limiting belief definitely was putting myself first is selfish. It's taking away from someone else. And it becomes really, really important for us to be able to identify those limiting beliefs and those things that might be stopping us from taking care of ourselves, because in reality it is like that airplane mask, right? Like if we have nothing left to give, then we can't do our jobs, we can't take care of everyone else. But sometimes that feels like the opposite.
Yeah. And Evelyn said, I always feel like I'm letting someone down, which makes it harder to think of myself. And I can identify with that. And Kevin says, it also seems to oversimplify how complicated and dynamic opposed needs can be. Yes, that's a really good point, Kevin. It's like everything is relative to other things. Beth is here.
Yay!
And Beth says that she really identifies with the statement that someone else's needs are more urgent, or we're always comparing. Once again, like they talked at the beginning of the session, like, somebody else's trauma might always be worse. Yeah, these are all really, really great, and I think we're kind of all coming from the same place. But I think it takes a lot of vulnerability also to talk about this. So we appreciate you guys sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the slides. Thank you guys for sharing
Perfect.
again.
Yeah, thank you everyone for doing that exercise. And like Christine said, it takes a lot of trust to be vulnerable. So I appreciate your responses. So once we've identified those limiting beliefs, let's talk about how we can move forward and overcome them. And the beginning of that is to start to ask yourself some questions. So for me, if my limiting belief is taking care of myself, self-care is selfish, then I can start to ask myself and challenge those beliefs by asking questions like, what if I'm wrong? Or how is this belief serving me? And then really looking at like what is it holding me back from, and is holding on to this belief worth it? After we have asked ourselves some of these questions, we can create and test alternative beliefs. And a really good exercise for doing this is to write down your assumption. So for me, I would write down my assumption that self care is selfish, or self care takes away from others, if that's what my limiting belief is. And then I could create a list of alternative beliefs. So write down then 4 or 5 possible alternatives to that statement. So I might say, taking care of myself gives me the energy to take care of others. And once you have that list of 4 or 5, that can show you that you really are choosing what you believe and that you do have options. So that's just a little brief um, exercise on overcoming those limiting beliefs. So let's talk a little bit more about self care. So, this is one of my favorite definitions that I found of self care, and it really did come just from an Amazon inspirational poster. And that is that self care is the active process of making your body and mind a pleasant place to inhabit by filling your own cup first. And I think the reason that I really like this definition is that self care, society will tell us it has to be certain things. It has to be a pedicure. It has to be a big vacation. It has to be all of these things. But self care is really individualized. And it's whatever gets you, if we go back to that polyvagal model that Rosemarie was sharing with us, it's anything that gets us from those yellow and red sections back into that green where we're feeling calm. And so it can be different things at different times, but it really is different for every person, and that there's no right or wrong way to do self-care. In that PDF with all of your handouts, starting on about the fourth page, the last several pages, is a self care inventory. And this is a tool that can be used. You can kind of go through and rate them with the scale that they give you. But one of the reasons that I really like giving this handout is that there's a lot of things on there that I may or may not have thought about self care or thought of as self care before I saw this list. I also like that it divides self care into different sections. So there's physical self care, there's psychological self care, emotional self care. And one example for me, and somewhere on there, it talks about wearing clothes that make you feel good and you're comfortable. And I never actually thought about how I dress as being a form of self care. But but what I did notice is that every Tuesday I have to go into this manager's meeting that I don't particularly love. We talk about a lot of hard things, and every week for that day, I really felt like I had to dress up, and so I would go into this meeting wearing clothes that maybe weren't the most comfortable. I was presenting like my most professional self, but so I changed that habit bit and started wearing more comfortable clothes to that meeting, not unprofessional, but just some things that made me feel better and more comfortable. And I found that it really was easier for me to sit through those meetings. So that leads us into the difference between macro self care and micro self care. This was a concept that I had not heard before we took this class. So often, like I said, we are receiving the message that self care has to be these big life changing things that you have to give some giant investment. Maybe that's energy or money or time. And that can lead us to believing that it's wasteful for us to indulge in self-care if we can't do it at this like high level, right? So if I can't take a 5-day vacation, taking a 5-minute break isn't really going to help. It's not going to do anything. And so we want to look at macro self-care, those big things that we can do for ourselves, like taking a vacation, getting a pedicure, and then turn our attention more towards micro self-care. And this is moving away from that idea of really expensive, really time consuming things. And micro self-care is all about the benefits of making small changes with reliable frequency. So the phrase little and often is associated with the concept of micro self-care. It's that paradigm shift that if we use these small replenishing moments throughout the day, um, they can really be helpful. And what's awesome about micro self care is that it's available to us all the time. It's simple, it's free, and therefore, if we try something in this micro self care realm and it doesn't work for us, we can move on. We don't have to keep trying it. We don't have to hold on to it. And we haven't invested a whole lot of time or money or energy into it. So let's talk a little bit about targeted micro self-care, and these can fall into three different categories. The first one are our grounding tools, and grounding tools can help when you're exposed to trauma by giving you a feeling of safety. So this can be as simple as imagining yourself in a place where you feel safe and warm. And what's really cool about our brains is that when you take a few seconds just to imagine that you're in a safe place, your body will actually react as if you're there. And so, going back to that polyvagal model, if I'm using a grounding technique where I'm just taking a quick second to think, okay, I can be safe, I can be calm, and it can calm my body down and help me stay in the moment and work through whatever I need to do. The next category are energizing tools, and these are needed when we're feeling compassion fatigue because oftentimes in those moments we have a lack of motivation, especially for emotional engagement. And that can be due to our waning empathy. We just need to energize our sense of purpose and wellness. And the concept of micro self care was actually created by a therapist. And she found that she needed something between her clients. So these were designed to do in just minutes between each client, or I like to think about it minutes before you're going out to a public desk, or minutes before you answer that email or open your email to see what the world needs from you, or before you take that phone call that may or may not be from an angry patron. And in this energizing category, what she would do is put a note on the back of her door as she would go out to the waiting room to greet her clients. And it just said, I do this work because, and then you fill in the blank. Right? So give yourself that burst of intentional motivation by remembering why you started working in libraries anyway, like in the first place. So, and I suggest putting this near your workstation or your locker so that you can see, I do this work because I really care about access to information. I do this work because I love working with kids and teaching them early literacy skills. So just that burst of energy. The last one, the last category we're going to talk about in this targeted micro self care is relaxing tools. And these are needed when you're slipping into that burnout so that you can feel replenished, at ease, and then in a place where you can work again. And my personal example of this is that I started um, doing some deep breathing exercises when I'm making those big transitions for my day. So I will drive home from work and I will pull into my garage and just sit in my car and relax. That on different days that looks different. Like I have a meditation app on my phone, so maybe I do a 5-minute meditation. I that app also has breathing exercises, so maybe I do that. It also can take the form of scrolling through funny cat videos on the internet. Whatever is going to help me relax, so that I can move again back into the work that I need. So it's during those transition times. I also do this when I arrive at work in the morning. I just kind of stop, take a breath from all of the hectic things that may have happened in the morning. So just those targeted little bits of self-care that you can do little and often throughout the day can be really helpful. The last thing I want to talk with you about that can really help you take care of yourself is being able to shift your perceptions. So you can see on this slide, we have external locus of control on the left and internal locus of control on the right. We want to be really cautious of this binary thinking because it can cause us to feel like we have absolutely no control over what goes on. And as we learn to recognize our stress responses, especially as it relates to our sense of danger, like we were talking about in that polyvagal model, so as we move into those yellow and red categories, we can learn to give ourselves what we need in the moment and get us back into that green. So if we look at these are just 4 examples of where we might fall into binary thinking. So the first one is the difference between being dysregulated, or you can think of that as being really reactive, where your sympathetic nervous system is operating and you are definitely more reactive in that yellow and red. Like when you sense danger, you're ready for the world to attack, you're getting ready to react to what's happening. But if you can shift your perception to being intentionally responsive or more regulated through either deep breathing or, some of those grounding techniques, then you can stop and your parasympathetic nervous system can take over so that you can stop and ask yourself, am I really in danger? Okay. The next category is the difference between thinking of yourself as being a victim to being empowered. And it's really easy, I think, especially at work, depending on your position. Maybe you don't make policy, you might not have a choice over your schedule or what duties you have to do. Um, but you do have control over any choices that you make. So instead of thinking about how the things that you can't control or the choices you don't get to make, you can say to yourself, I make choices where I can. So some examples of that would be that I chose this profession. I might choose to take a training on a certain topic. I can choose the position that I am in, or if I stay in that position, I can I can focus on the aspects of my work that I love to do and just move yourself into that more empowered place where you're focusing on what you actually do have choice over. The next one is the difference between demand and choice. So we are in a service industry, and as Christine was mentioning earlier, like we can get stuck in that, like because good customer service equals always saying yes. So when someone approaches us, it's really easy to say whatever comes at me is a demand. So if someone comes to the desk and even if they're asking it as a question, it's sometimes easy for us to slip into a place where we're seeing it as a demand. We get an email from a colleague that asks for a piece of information. If we see that as a demand, we have no choice. But if you see it as a request, then you have the choice to choose how you respond. So it's just that little bit of reframing of this isn't a demand. I need to really stop and think of this as a choice and intentionally respond to what they're asking. And that might be to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that right now. or I'm sorry, we can do this other thing instead. But as we know, we can't always say yes. And that can put us, if we're looking at everything as a demand, that can put us in a pretty, what can feel like a really powerless position. And lastly, we can focus on being process driven rather than outcome driven. So, if we're outcome driven, we're looking at a specific desired outcome. An example of that might be that we want each patron to have a really positive library experience. That's a focus on the outcome. And the reality is, we don't always have control over that outcome. In this example, we don't have control over how a patron feels. We don't have control over how that patron walks away from the library, but we do have control over the process. So if we shift a little bit to being more process driven, then we can say that, my value is determined not by the outcome of the situation, but how I interact in that situation. And so this also takes away the threat of failure, because I can only control myself and I can control how I act in that interaction or that exchange, but I can't actually control how the patron responds. And so if I'm focusing on myself and the process more so, then I'm more likely to come out of that exchange um, feeling good about it, no matter how the patron walks away. So that's a quick overview of what it looks like to sort of reframe and shift our perceptions. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Rosemarie for some final thoughts.
Thanks, Sydney. Some final thoughts are just, I see you, I see the work that we do and how hard this is. So thank you for being here and acknowledging that the hard work that we do, it is exhausting, especially reading some of these comments. And it's nationwide. So yes, thank you. Acknowledging that we experience trauma, understanding our bodies and what's going on, the emotions that we're feeling are just signaling to us what's going on. And that if you are feeling these compassion fatigue symptoms, there's nothing wrong with you. If we are feeling exhausted, there's nothing wrong. It's just our bodies being our bodies. And so therefore, how do we take back that control? We take over those limiting beliefs and really try to bring back what we can. And so if we think about it, what can we do after thinking about Sydney's limiting beliefs and how to reframe that? What can we do to take care of ourselves? And what do we think we can do for ourselves personally? What can we do organizationally? And there were a lot of us, again, in that poll earlier, that feel like maybe we don't have what we need at work. So if you could dream it, if you could advocate for yourself, at Mesa County Libraries, we have a few policies that I'm really thankful for. That mental health days are sick days. We are advocated for to take mental health days as sick days. Do you have policies in place that say if there is a meeting that is causing distress, then you have the ability to get up and leave? Distress is definitely intentionally used as a word there. So what other policies does your library have that maybe you can utilize to help take care of yourself? If you are lucky enough to have health benefits, what health benefits do you have access to? Do you have an employee assistance program? Do you have trusted and safe security where you work? Trusted and safe emphasized there. Are you offered the appropriate training to handle difficult situations? Are you encouraged to set healthy boundaries with patrons and other staff? Are you encouraged to take all of your breaks? Your lunch, 15-minute breaks, do you take them? And then also in the relation that Sydney, during my training, our staff, and I know this isn't always accessible, but we do hourly rotations where you're only public facing for an hour at a time. And I do recognize that there are locations at our library system that does not allow that. But again, like say we have a branch that's only staffed by one person, they are encouraged that if there's something going on, you can close your library. And so again, thinking about what we can do for ourselves health-wise, those limiting beliefs, working on what we can do for ourselves. So we're going to open up a word cloud activity. And in 3 things, what would help you in your place of employment or yourself that might get you through some of these compassion fatigue symptoms? What do you think you can give yourself?
So there's a little tiny chat box in the middle of the word cloud box. And so you can enter the action items there and it will populate a word cloud. Yes, personal days.
Mhm.
I have to give a shout out to our organization because this morning for Library Workers Day, we were all given a little note. We get one personal day every year that we can use. And this year for Library Workers Day, they actually gave us all another one. So that was really exciting and just another way that I'm grateful for our organization that does take care of us.
Seeing uninterrupted time.
Yeah.
Time off the desk. Go outside.
Walking meetings.
Room for
Sunshine.
mistakes.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just noticing that one as well. Room for mistakes, I think, is a huge thing.
Yeah, scheduling email. I'm trying to be really better because I start work really, really early in the morning for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
And when I'm sending email, which I will like to do, when I'm doing that, is I reset it to go at 8 o'clock. I don't understand why Outlook defaults to 5 p.m. and rather than 8 a.m., but there we are. Leave the building more often. Yeah, a change of scenery. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Taking breaks, man. It's like the winter right now.
Right.
And yes, being staffed appropriately.
Yeah.
Having coffee. Work-life balance, if there is such a thing.
Remember joy. Yeah, like that post-it note of I do this because I started doing a gratitude journal practice at the beginning of every day. First thing I do when I get into work is just 5 things that brought me joy.
Yeah. And I've read some research about, how you can reconnect with your purpose, your why for libraries. And for each of us, it can be very different. But if you're struggling with it, you might look up job crafting or any research done by Marcus Buckingham. He has a book called Love and Work, and he postulates that if people spend as little as 20% of their time doing something that fills them up, that connects them with that purpose, it can really keep burnout at bay. So those are two resources that you might think about as well. Oh, I like give yourself grace. I'm horrible at that. Like I'm always thinking that I didn't do something right or, somebody else needs something from me. So I like that. And low energy tasks. Yeah. We all need some of those where they're just sort of like you go and you do the thing and you cross it off your list.
I also like the one that said, be honest with yourself. I have this lie I tell myself, like, oh, I can do all of these things. Like, oh, no, that's not too much. So really, really being honest with yourself about what you need and where your capacity lies. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Supervisor support, a special treat that makes you happy. These are all awesome. I have the ability to, and I'll do it after the session, to download this, I believe, as a what's the word, like a JPEG. And so I will add this to Libraries Learn as well. Take time to laugh. Yes. Sometimes I just laugh at myself because it's easy. These are awesome. So I'm going to leave the word cloud up and kind of head to my closing. I won't bring up my closing slide just yet. I will say, and I know they mentioned it before, that there is a bibliography that will be included for the slides that they shared. So I'm going to post the slides along with the recording and the handout. Was there anything else, I'm sorry, that you guys wanted to mention? Sydney and Rosemary, before I do my little ending spiel?
I just want to mention at the end of the slides also, after the list of resources and the bibliography, there's a breathing exercise and then also some simple grounding techniques. So don't stop scrolling after you've seen the two like bibliography slides. There's a couple of exercises after those.
All right. So to begin with, I want to say thank you to everybody who attended this session and for sharing what you did in the chat and in this word cloud and your questions along the way. We're kind of all in this together, and we had people from across the United States. So this was it's very common in libraries. And I want to also extend a huge thank you to our presenters, Sydney and Rosemarie, for providing this session for us today. I'm also, if I typed it correctly, I am putting my email in chat. If any of you need a certificate for attending today, just click on the live link that is in chat. And I will send you within a day or two a certificate for you. And if I can pull up Libraries Learn to show you where the archive will be. Bear with me one second. We had internet difficulties today, and I am working without my usual tools right in front of me. Copy and paste. Oh, did I type that already? Okay. So Libraries Learn is now all in chat. So that is within about an hour or so where the archive, the handouts, the slides, and all of these great things will be. And I'm just making sure that there aren't any additional questions before we log off for this afternoon. Once again, thank you guys so much for attending. And thank you to our presenter. Thank you to our captionist. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon and great rest of your week, and do some of the things that are listed on the word cloud.